More often than not, thumbnail design is a very delicate work. And in this video, I'll give you a quick layer-by-layer breakdown of these 3 burnt chip thumbnails so you can see what it takes to bring these ideas to life. The very first concept idea was inspired by these thumbnails, and we wanted to put the emphasis on the vehicle hanging off the cliff. However, after a quick concept sketch, we realized we should take another direction and revisit this option later. That's when we drew this split image concept, and that's when we ended up with this first thumbnail option. So here's the layer-by-layer breakdown. Let's start with the left side where Josh is driving this clean tuk-tuk in a nice, sunny environment. And yes, the vehicle is also heavily edited, but we'll get to that part shortly. As for the main background option, I've used this AI-generated image. In the next step, I removed the sky, and I also extended the road on the bottom. And here's the better version of the sky, where I also included some birds. Then, to make it more realistic, I've added the vehicle shadow. It doesn't look perfect when you take a closer look at it, but it's good enough to trick you. I also made the background brighter to make everything seem more alive and adventurous. And I've also created this gradient to serve as a window at the back of the vehicle. It's not very visible here, but for other use cases, it's a good addition. And now that we have the environment sorted out, let's show the steps that went into editing this tuk-tuk. Initially, I tried generating it with an AI, but it wasn't successful, so I had to use a real image. I removed the background, and then I removed all the little things that might be distracting. I fixed the front tire that was tilted to the side, and then I changed the color from green and yellow to white and red. Then I added the photo of our main star, and from this other stock photo, I took the hands on the steering wheel and placed it inside my project, which I blended with the rest of the elements. I added these clean red lights, and I took these bus seats and put them behind Josh. I turned them into red, added some shadow, and made the whole vehicle brighter to fit the environment. And just like that, we have our main fella driving the tuk-tuk happily inside an exotic country. However, on the other side, we're going to present a very different story. I'll take the same tuk-tuk and I'll make it look like it went straight through hell. But first, I'll replace the image of Josh with one where he's crying and clearly in distress. After that, to ruin the look of our clean vehicle, I'll bring back the tilted front tire, take out one of the headlights, and make the engine visible through a giant hole in the middle of the vehicle. For the background, I first tested this one out, but figured I could get some better results, so I ended up generating this environment, which was a solid option. And to amplify the bad conditions, I generated this cracked road and added it to our scene. I quickly blended the left part, and then in the same area, I've added this death warning sign. To continue with bad weather conditions, I added this blue lightning in the distance, and rain falling down from the sky. To make the road look like it's wet, I've simply used this stock image and blended it onto the road surface. I then continued by making the scene darker, enhancing the lightning, adding the tuk-tuk shadow, blurring out the back window, adding some glass cracks to it, and then adding a bunch of water splashes all around the vehicle and even more rain. In order to have a stronger contrast between the two scenes in this thumbnail, I've added the night filter effect to the right side, which made it look even more dark and blue. I proceeded by adding more shadows, grunge textures, and water drops onto the vehicle. And in the end, I made the tuk-tuk a bit darker with stronger highlights, and I also added the blue lights coming from headlights. With some final camera raw adjustment filters and added text inside both scenes, I present you the final version of this thumbnail. As for the second thumbnail option, we wanted to focus more on the racing aspect of it. But before we start the breakdown, I want you to pause the video and guess which parts of this thumbnail are real and which parts are AI generated. If you guess these parts as real and the rest of the thumbnail as an AI generated imagery, you're 100% right, and you should treat yourself with a cookie as a reward. Anyway, I started with this image where I removed the person from the first tuk-tuk and the whole background. Then I recreated these bars that hold the roof of the vehicle. After that, I placed in the second AI-generated image, from which I only kept the second tuk-tuk and the road it's driving on. We wanted the blue ocean and exotic green palms for the background, so that's exactly what we did. And yes, we can't forget the birds. After the background compositing was done, I added our 3 main subjects: Josh in the first vehicle closer to the camera, and 2 of his friends in the second vehicle. One of them is laying on the roof, so that's a big plus for selling the adventure and adrenaline aspects of the video. And after the overall compositing was done, all I needed to do was to fix some details and blend everything together to create more cohesive scene. Starting with the first vehicle, I made sure to make it brighter and create a warm color tone on Josh's body. Then, I added some contact shadows, realistic window reflections, and in the end, I removed all blue hues from inside the vehicle so it looks less distracting. After that, I added the blur to the background so our scene appears to be in motion, and I also boosted the green color so everything looks more vibrant. I added window reflection to the second vehicle and made sure to also apply some warm tones. And to blend the guy on the roof with the roof, I added a contact shadow below him. And that's pretty much all for the blending part. The rest of the edit I did was focus on creating a stronger atmosphere in the scene, which was easy to achieve with some dust behind the vehicles and orange sparks below the tires. And now when I'm editing this video, 8 months after I've created this thumbnail, I've noticed a few amateur mistakes I didn't notice while I was working on it. The thing that's bothering me the most is this edge line from one of the dust texture images. The other two mistakes are these green light reflections on the skin that I didn't remove properly, and also this whole messy area here with different shirt colors, and again, poorly removed green screen background. But that's life, and we ultimately move on from the mistakes we make. And speaking of moving on, let's take a look at the final thumbnail. This thumbnail concept is by far my favorite out of these three. I just love the final composition and the colors and how it's so pretty to look at. This is what Josh had sent me to get started with. I didn't quite do everything that's on this sketch, but I would say I did a pretty good job executing his concept idea regardless. Starting with the vehicle edit from the first thumbnail concept, I just positioned it in the center of the canvas, and then added the fella on the roof. For the bridge, I found this great stock image on the internet which fit the composition perfectly. If I wasn't able to find something like this, I would have to rely on Midjourney to generate something good. But generally, for these types of things, it's best to use the real imagery. I did, however, have to rely on generative AI to expand the original image like this. Once I had the perspective and the position right, I deleted the areas I did not need, which were going to be replaced anyway. For the mountains on the left, I generated these two images in Midjourney and combined them to get this side of the thumbnail ready. Afterwards, I generated this image that I used for the narrow road in the distance. I then added the sky, blended it with the rest of the elements, added the birds, then also blended them with the environment. And finally, to finish off with the world building, I took everything except the sky and made it even brighter. Then, I proceeded by editing our male model that's on the roof by making all these small changes that you're seeing right now. After that, I moved on to the bridge to try and make it look a bit more dangerous. I used this real-life image of cracked wood planks and just blended it with the rest of the bridge. All of a sudden, the bridge looks a tiny bit more dangerous. Then, I did another round of shading the bridge by making some parts of it brighter and also adding more contrast. To continue with my making it dangerous mission, I added this broken wood part at the top of the guardrail. And then, to make everything official, I added this danger ahead sign that really pops with its bright yellow color. If this doesn't make you think that Josh and his friend are in danger, I'm afraid nothing will. To finalize the thumbnail with some details, I've added a bunch of contact shadows on the bridge, dust and smoke behind the vehicle, scratches on the front, even more smoke and dust coming from the old wood beneath. And that's about everything. In the end, I ran it through a Final Camera Raw filter and ended up with this as the finished thumbnail. Which one out of these three thumbnails do you like the most? Let me know in the comments down below, and thanks for watching.